All right, welcome back. And for this video lesson, we're going to be talking about the strategy for answering the first of the speaking tasks. It's the independent task 1. Now, there are a few pieces of the strategy that really have to do with what you do to prepare for the exam, and then there are some strategies for what you actually do on exam day when you're doing this task. First of all, one of the things that you should know is that for not only every question and task on the entire exam, but specifically for the speaking section, you should really know the directions for each and every task before the exam day. This is very important because it's going to give you a lot of extra preparation time when you're actually dealing with these tasks, as you'll see in this explanation below. So first of all, before the exam day, when you're practicing this particular task, you should practice each example that you use many times. And the reason for this is simple. It's because when a person is learning some new technique, some new task, some new action, what happens in the brain is that you are building new neural pathways. You're building new connections in your brain for doing this particular task. So when you're practicing one thing over and over and over again, and you get really good at just that one thing, when you do something else which is similar but slightly different, your brain uses those neural pathways that you've already developed to be able to do that other slightly different thing much easier. So by practicing one particular example of this task type, you will actually make it easier for yourself to do other particular examples. So even if the question is completely different, since the structure of the task is exactly the same, the way that you answer it, the structure is also going to be very similar. So by practicing one example many times, it makes it easier to answer or to respond to any particular task that they may give to you. Now, as you might remember, I mentioned that with the different things that they will ask you to speak about, there's really only about 5 or 6 different possible things that they would ask you about. Usually a family member, a best friend, a favorite pastime activity, maybe a traditional holiday or celebration in your culture, or some sort of favorites. And so a lot of those different categories overlap. Like maybe you have a favorite pastime that involves your best friend or a family member, or you have an inspiration in your life that happens to be a best friend or a family member, or maybe a favorite thing has to do with one of those family members or friends, or a particular holiday or celebration from your culture or from your family. So a lot of the different topics do overlap, and so that way, when you're answering different task types, even if they're asking for different particular things to talk about, your answer is going to not only be structurally similar, but in a lot of cases, you can actually talk about the same thing. For example, here it says, describe a favorite pastime activity from your childhood. Well, maybe that pastime activity was just riding your bicycle around your neighborhood with your friends. Okay, so there the focus is on the activity. We used to ride around my village with my best friend and blah blah blah. So that could be your answer there, talking about that particular activity. But then with another question type here, talk about a tradition that is unique to your family, community, country, or culture. Well, maybe something that you did with your family was riding bicycle. So maybe that same activity of riding the bicycle around the neighborhood had to do with your family. Or maybe it says, describe a person who is your best friend. Explain why this person is your best friend. Maybe that activity of riding bikes had to do with that best friend. So you can use a lot of the same information, but most importantly about practicing the same example over and over until you get it perfectly, so that you get all of the information that you're supposed to put into the answer or the response, like the reasons and examples, so that you can say that perfectly within 45 seconds so that you don't get your response cut off at the end of the recording, and also so that you don't have a lot of time left over, like if you're speaking too fast. So practice it many times. Also, this is not only good for just the structure of the of the answer, but like here, it says to practice with a clock. That's also very important because you want to get to know what 45 seconds actually feels like when you're speaking. Now, 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to give your response does not seem like a very long time. But you'll find in this next part that 15 seconds is not even going to be necessary to provide your response. And 45 seconds is exactly the right amount of time to give your response. Like I mentioned on this page here, they don't seem like a lot of time, but I've practiced this particular question type over and over again numerous times. And if you follow the recipe, so to speak, about giving your answer and then giving reasons and examples to support your response, then you'll find that to give a very good response, it takes almost exactly 45 seconds. So practice with a clock, so that way you get an idea of how much information you should put into your answer, but also so that you get an idea of how fast you should be speaking. Because if you speak too fast and you end up with time left over, then you can also get graded down for that. So that takes care of the strategy of what you should do before exam day with this particular task type. Now, on exam day, this is very important. Once the task appears on the screen, write your answer. Because when you see this, describe a favorite pastime activity from your childhood. Okay, that's simple. You could read that in probably 2 to 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds at most. The next part, say why you enjoyed doing this activity. Give reasons and examples to explain your response. So this second half of the task in every situation is always going to be essentially the same. It's going to ask you to give reasons and examples or explanations and details. But the main part of the task is always this first sentence. Like here, describe the person who is your best friend. Well, we already know that we're going to have to explain why, and we should give reasons and examples. Describe a favorite pastime activity from your childhood. Well, we're going to know that we have to explain why it was a favorite, why you enjoyed it, why it was your favorite, giving reasons and examples. Talk about a tradition that is unique to your family, community, country, or culture. They probably won't give you 4 choices like that. They'll probably just give you maybe 1 or 2 to describe a tradition that's unique to your family or your culture or something like that. But we already know you're going to have to describe why and give reasons and examples. So the second half of the task that's on the screen is always going to be essentially the same. It's the directions for the task. And since you already know that, then you don't need to even read that part. Just read the first part. Describe the person who is your best friend. All right? Well, we already know we need to give reasons and examples to do that. So as soon as you get done reading that, just start writing down what your answer is. And you'll see that down here, how we're going to do that. The other part about this is that you should not wait for the recording to read this to you, because it will. And it's going to read slower than you could. The person might sound, or the voice in the recording would sound something like, describe a favorite pastime activity from your childhood. Say why you enjoyed doing this activity, giving reasons and examples to explain your response. And then it might even give more information about the instructions by saying something like, you will have 15 seconds to prepare your response, and then 45 seconds to give your response. You may start preparing your answer now. Beep. Okay, that's like another 15 to 20 seconds of extra information that you don't need. So as soon as you read this, that 15 seconds of preparation time turns into close to 30 seconds. The thing is, you don't need that much preparation time, because the first thing is, you're going to already have these ideas of who you're going to speak about. This is going to get into the master skills, which you will learn about soon, because you know they're always going to ask about either a family member, a friend, a favorite pastime, an inspiration, or a tradition or holiday, something like that. So if you have ideas for all of those different topics already, and I would suggest not more than one, think of one family member where you could talk about all of those different things, one friend where you could talk about all those things, one holiday that has a friend and a family member involved, a favorite pastime activity that also involves a friend or a family member. If you do it that way, you will already know your answer by the time you finish reading that very first section here. So then you start writing that right away. The other part is you need to try to give at least 2 reasons or examples for your answer. Now, this should be just like a word or 2, and you'll see that down below as well. But also write some details for each reason or example. Now, this is not going to be necessarily possible every single time. Like if they ask you who your best friend is, well, you can write that down without thinking about it very much, and then explain why that person is your best friend. So if you can think up 2 reasons why that person was your best friend, great. So you write the person's name down. You write down reason 1, reason 2. Maybe think of a couple examples of why that person was your best friend, and then write each one down. And then you use that for your example response. Now, if you've already listened to this example response, you'll notice that it didn't necessarily follow this complete structure. This is just a guideline. Because when you're looking at these notes and you're formulating sentences, you'll notice, even just listening from this, but you'll also notice that when you're speaking, maybe something from up here also had to do with something down here. So you're kind of mixing information. But the most important thing is that you want to have more than one. Now, if you only had one reason why the person was your best friend, or whatever the reason was according to whatever the topic is, if you can only think of one reason, try to have more examples. Or if you can only think of one example, try to give a lot of explanation about that. But as it says in all of the question, reasons and examples, plural. So you don't want to just give one. So you'll notice by listening to the example here that I kind of mix a few things together. Okay, so the question was, talk about a person, well, it's not a question, the statement. It says to talk about a person who has been an inspiration in your life. Okay, this is talking about inspirations, but you'll notice that I use my best friend. So write the person's name down, and here you'll see there's 2 different ways that I kind of lay this out. The person's name, his best friend, does everything perfect. Okay, but then I also mentioned 2 possible reasons or explanations, that he's very smart, and he's very artistic. And I gave a couple examples about building a car and building a tree fort. But he's also very artistic, and then I mentioned cooking a meal, but he's also artistic in just about everything he did. So in giving the response, this is just the guideline. My friends, my best friend is my friend Ben. He does everything perfect. He's smart. He's an engineer. He's building a car. He builds a tree fort. So this is just a guideline that you use. If you go through and say it like a formula perfectly, then it's probably going to sound like they mentioned in the official video where it said, don't memorize your answer. What they're talking about is sounding as if you're just reading from a script. This is just a guideline. This is another way that you could put it down. The answer was Ben. Reason 1, he does everything perfect. And okay, maybe there isn't another reason. So here I'm using smart and artistic as different examples of how he does things perfectly. He's smart. He's building a car and he builds a tree fort for his kids. It takes brain power. He comes up with things just from his own mind to build a tree fort. But he's also artistic. Well, that also has to do with building the car and the tree fort, but also even the other example of cooking. So you'll notice here, I didn't follow exactly this structure, but this is my guideline. If you use this as your guideline structure for this particular question type, you'll do just fine, especially if you follow the strategy of this right here, practicing many, many times the same question. Now here in these examples, I don't have example responses. So you have 3 examples that you can choose from just in this course. And then practice those over and over. Use this as a guideline, of what it could sound like. Not necessarily what it should sound like, but it's a general idea. You have to make it your own. Use your own words. Just make sure to practice it over and over again, using this as your guideline. And once you get comfortable with doing this in your own way, then no matter what you are asked to speak about, since it is the same structure for each of the actual questions or tasks that they give you, your response is going to be the same structure as well. And so that's really it. Just follow that particular structure as a guideline. Practice it as many times as you possibly can. Get to know what 45 seconds feels like for your response time, so you know how much information to put in and also how fast you should be speaking. and you will totally master and dominate this particular task type in the speaking section. And that's it for this particular lesson. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next lesson.